Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. You will notice the next few videos, and the one prior to this, will have me wearing all the same thing, all the same outfit. Not even the shawl pin will change just because I'm recording one video after another, to make them a little bit shorter and to try to gather my thoughts together. So this particular video does have a bit of a Tudor / Renaissance theme going on. I have not yet added this to my journal because I still need to, I think I've stamped my card already. I think I did when I finished it. If not, I'll check on Goodreads or Storygraph to see when I finish this I can stamp my library card correctly. I absolutely love this book. 5 stars all the way. I feel like seeing the court through Chapuis's eyes has been really helpful. I do feel like, yes, where he does, even though he has definite emotional attachments to certain people over others, I do feel that he tries to provide as unbiased a view as one could during that time period. These were very tumultuous time periods. You were going to have strong feelings. And his role was a very challenging one, where he felt very strongly and saw very strongly his responsibility to try to protect the interests of Catherine of Aragon and her daughter Mary as much as possible, for Mary's cousin and Catherine's nephew, Charles. I think it was Charles. So he had that goal to protect his patron's family, but also to promote the interests of the Holy Roman Emperor when it came to relations with England. And sometimes those two goals did not line up very well. So he had a balancing act sometimes. But very clever man. He naturally did not have much of a fondness for Anne Boleyn, but he did seem to respect the Boleyns even if he didn't agree with them. There was that, and that was kind of cool to see. It was also nice to see from his point of view that he did praise her for the way she did approach her death, Anne, and saw the way that her trial went as being unjust, just like he did her brothers. But what I found particularly interesting was his relationship with Cromwell. He saw Cromwell as the power behind the throne, and even though they didn't agree on much, he seemed to feel like this was the one man that he could connect to socially. So it almost seemed like they tried to keep a distance between their professional selves and their personal selves. It was just very interesting to read about that relationship, considering the fact that they did not agree on many things politically and would try to play each other in order to promote the interests of their religion and of their respective patrons. But yeah, I really enjoyed this peek into the Tudor court. I will be writing up a review for both Goodreads and Storygraph once I sit down and look through my notes here, and once I put together my journal entry for this. I would recommend this to anyone to read. I will probably reread this. I enjoyed meeting each of the wives through his eyes. You don't see much of Jane Seymour's queenship while he's there because he had left England for a period during that time. And you see some of Anne of Cleves, but I really enjoyed meeting Catherine Howard through his eyes. It helped me see her a little bit differently. It gave more than just the view of someone who is kind of fluttery and more interested in romances than anything else. And yes, I do think that there was some dilly-dallying around the court for her. Maybe not as much as might have been presented in her case. I'm not sure how much presented exactly in her case because I haven't read a book specifically on her, but I do believe there were at least 1 or 2 cases of infidelity on her part while she was married to Henry. That being said, it was nice and interesting to see her wanting and attempting to behave as a queen, to do the petitioning thing. It gave me a picture of a very young queen who wanted to do well at her job and who eventually wanted to get along with her stepdaughter, even though it took a little bit of doing at the beginning, because she and Mary weren't that far apart in age. The other one I really enjoyed seeing through his point of view was Catherine Parr. He really had a lot of respect for Catherine Parr. It seems like she was the one he respected the most after Catherine of Aragon. And it was just, I really enjoyed seeing the other queens through his eyes. I would recommend reading it. His talking about his farewell to Mary and to Catherine Parr before he leaves his duties in England to retire. It's just a very touching scene. So, yeah, enjoyable book. I recommend getting to know Chapuis, getting to know the court through his eyes. I mean, we're basically seeing the court somewhat through his eyes in anything we read during Tudor time periods, because he was very detailed in his report, to the point that his successor actually got scolded by the Holy Roman Emperor for not sending as detailed or frequent letters as Chapuis did. I guess that the Holy Roman Emperor appreciated the gossip of court as well as appreciated not just gossip, appreciated the color that Chapuis provided, what the people would wear, how they talked, the personalities, and not just the very bare bones. The Holy Roman Emperor, whichever one happened to be in charge at the time, because I think he did go between 2. I think it was Charles and then the one after him. But Charles was during the most of the period. I think it was Charles. Yep. Okay. So, Charles had gotten spoiled because Chapuis was so detailed. So yeah, most things are going to, written on Tudor times, are going to have some Chapuis influence, either because people are going to accept what he says, or because they're going to dismiss it. I think, unfortunately, sometimes he gets dismissed, and I do agree with the author on this, that sometimes he gets dismissed because people don't necessarily like what he has to say. And just because he had an opinion one way or another doesn't necessarily mean that what he has to say about certain people is untrue. There is no reason to believe, there's no evidence against some of the things he said about Anne's personality. And some of the things have been corroborated by French sources as well. So sometimes he gets a bad rap. Also, other sources were known to call her the concubine even before he did. And he only started after Catherine of Aragon's death, which he very much blamed Henry and Anne for causing. For a while, he thought about whether or not Catherine had been poisoned. In the end, I think he just decided that they treated her so poorly that she just eventually died. But he eventually did discount the poison theory. Anyway, good book. Highly recommend. Now that I've rambled on that for, 10 minutes, tea. Still drinking my purple tea from the previous video. So before I go into the Tudor books I have to show, I wanted to show from TudorCon. I went ahead, I mentioned that I had TudorCon, I think it was not this past weekend, but the weekend before, and I attended online streaming. I was a little disappointed, not disappointed because of what was going on. I expected a couple topics that didn't get done. Initially, they had talked about maybe there being a topic of, fiber arts during Tudor times, but that was, a very preliminary topic suggestion and didn't end up coming into fruition because they couldn't get speakers or whatever. The only one I was truly disappointed with that wasn't there, that was actually on the itinerary, was we were supposed to have a talk on Holbein, the artist that did like all the famous Tudor paintings, the most famous paintings for Henry VIII, the very famous Anne of Cleves painting. So he's the artist of Tudor era England. But Hans Holbein, junior, because there is a senior as well. We were supposed to have our last talk being on him, but the person who was giving the talk, I guess she's in her doctorate, and she had a dissertation that it was either a talk or dissertation that a professor of hers who was really hard to get a compliment from gave her high praise about this topic that she did, so she decided to present it to us. And it was on George Boleyn, which was interesting, I will grant you. And I will be reading The Wolves in Tudor Court, I believe is what it's called. It's the same person who wrote this book, but it's about the Boleyns. So it's George Boleyn, Thomas Boleyn. I wonder if they're covering Norwick? I think it's Norwick. Yeah, I'm not going to find it easily if it does. Yeah, I thought he was going to come up quickly because... Norfolk. There it is. So I don't know if Norfolk will be included in that book, but that is the November book of the month for the Tudor group that I got to join in on when... It was Tudor Learning Circle. It's part of the people who ran TudorCon. But I did attend it streaming. There was also a talk by... Hold on. I kept wanting to say Elizabeth Norton, but that's not who it is. It is... I'm trying to see if I have one of her books here. Tracy Borman. So we had a book on... We had Tracy Borman talk, and it was about Elizabeth and Anne Boleyn. I'm not a huge Boleyn person. I mentioned this in the last video. I'm very much in the camp of Catherine of Aragon, so that automatically makes me more anti-Boleyn, but I do find the family to be interesting. I will eventually read Alison Weir's book on Anne Boleyn. I hear that is fairly well balanced. It's not one of these overly sympathetic to Anne books where they're trying to like rewrite her, like redeem her reputation, which I'm sorry, she took up with a married man and had her predecessor overthrown, and from that point her predecessor was treated quite terribly. So there's not much you can do to redeem Anne's reputation in my mind. So I have problems with reading the revisionist idea of Anne. But I don't mind reading a balanced one that, as I understand, Alison Weir is not terribly anti-Anne or terribly pro-Anne. She's middle of the road. So I will be reading her book on Anne. That's all I want. I want to give Anne her due without feeling like I'm reading Anne propaganda. But it's a big step for me because I have never really wanted to read about Anne by herself. But anyway, so the Tracy Borman talk was interesting, and she does have a book that's either coming out or is out about Anne and how Elizabeth felt about her, because she didn't have much time with Anne before Anne was killed. And actually Elizabeth did have a very difficult childhood, between having some memories perhaps, because I can't remember how old. I think she couldn't have been older than like 3, I think, when Anne was beheaded, although I can't remember for sure. But she would have some memories of her mother, but not a whole ton. And her father, quite early on, really had her declared illegitimate, so it's not like she ever had a good relationship with her father. So there's no wonder that she grew up with a very, very much of a distrust towards marriage, not wanting to be in a marriage. She saw too many marriages go wrong. But I go back and forth about whose devastation, how deeply each girl felt about their father's distancing from them. Like, I don't know if Elizabeth, because she didn't necessarily grow up with that attachment to her father, because she had her own court and then her father declared her illegitimate. So it's not like she had a long period of time where she felt truly loved by her father. So I'm wondering if that allowed her to have a bit of a distance. And that's something that Tracy does seem to suggest based on her talk, that Elizabeth actually had more fond feelings and fond memories of her mother. Did I say Anne? Elizabeth. Elizabeth had more fond memories of her mother versus her father, which would make sense if Henry wasn't really part of her life and really pushed her aside as illegitimate early on. Whereas I wonder if Mary, who had most of her life up until her teenage years of her father being really treating her very well, treating her like a daughter, and then having him turn around and be like, nope, you're illegitimate now, and I'm now going to treat you poorly. That had to have been crushing. So I could see from both points of view how both of those girls were severely damaged by Henry's treatment of them in different ways, where Elizabeth was never ever in the place to be able to trust anyone with her heart in the way that her mother or any other women that she saw in her life trusted men with their hearts. And then Mary, that feeling of abandonment, I think it probably made her very insecure, as well as living so miserably for so long in her life. It had to have been like whiplash. What happened overnight? It's like her father was a gremlin who got fed after midnight or something, and all of a sudden he changed from someone who loved her to someone who cast her mother aside and treated both of them terribly. It must have been just a mind-blowing world. Your whole world, your whole sense of reality turned upside down. I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like for her. And Elizabeth, in her, of course, had the fact that she never really got to know and experience the kind of loving family that Mary did from Catherine and Henry until the point that Henry cast Catherine off. So yeah, the talks did make me think a little bit about the relationship of the daughters with Henry and how that affected who they grew into, and how the upheavals of him and his wives affected their lives. But I did make a journal entry. Here's my name tag that I didn't wear. And I got some washi tape, and it says divorced, beheaded, died, divorced. Sorry, it keeps on. I had to cut it to make it fit. Divorced, beheaded, survived, and then it just says that again a couple more times around it. And then I had extra survived, so I stuck it under here, so it looks like it has my name, and it says TudorCon 2023 survived. And I already had this stamp, keep calm and carry on. And then in here I had this envelope that has bunnies on it, and I love bunnies, but it says, keep good men company and you shall be of the number. And the other thing it says is, knowledge makes humble, ignorance makes proud. So I thought that fit. And then I had this little sticker with a crown on it to make it look like it had been sealed. And inside, I have my TudorCon streaming ticket. That would not print in time for TudorCon, so I had to print it later for my journal. So, yes, have that little entry in my book journal there. Let me take a drink. All right. So the rest is just showing some books. It ran a little bit long because I went off on a tangent about Mary and Elizabeth, and we'll see how much I end up tightening that up. But as per usual, I was searching for good sales, and found this one, and I'm planning this one for around Christmas time. A Tudor Christmas. It's by Alison Weir and Siobhan Clark. And it looks like it just talks about the traditions of Tudor Christmases, and it looks like it might have some recipes. So this will be just a kind of fun thing to read during this period of time, or during that period of time. So once I get into Advent, maybe a little closer to Christmas, I'll start reading through this. Then next, I was talking about Tracy Borman, and got to be careful with these pages here. The binding is a little bit iffy. So this is Elizabeth's Women. The binding sounds a little crackly. Hopefully it'll hold up for me. So I know there's also another one that's similar, that's about the men around Henry, and I think I have the Kindle version of that. But yeah, I'm interested in seeing this. It'll probably have Mary, Queen of Scots. It'll have Mary the First. I would think Catherine, Howard, probably all of the queens. Maybe not Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon wasn't really around her that much. I guess neither was her mother, but yeah. Look forward to reading this eventually. It won't be this quarter. Hopefully this book will hold up okay. Then these two, both fairly cheap, and each book was recommended for different reasons in the comments, so it's the same topic, but it's Catherine of Aragon, and I did mention that I am very much into Catherine Aragon's court. This is by Giles Tremlett, Henry's Spanish Queen. So I heard good things about that. Thankfully, this one seems to be okay binding-wise. And looks like the text is fairly easy to read. So we'll eventually be reading this, just like I will eventually be reading the Garrett Mattingly one. Which I can't remember why there were different things I remember sounded good about each of them. So I look forward to reading them. No pictures in this one, so I'm glad that I have this one as well, because this has some of the paintings and stuff. So these are the two Catherine of Aragon books. And then finally, Queenship at the Renaissance Courts of Britain. This one just sounded interesting to me. It covers Catherine of Aragon and Margaret Tudor, 1503 to 1533. And I don't even know how I found this one. Catherine of Aragon, 1509 to 1533, and her sister-in-law, Margaret Tudor, 1503 to 1513, presided as queens over the glittering 16th century courts of England and Scotland, alongside their husbands, Henry VIII of England and James IV of Scotland. Although we know a great deal about these two formidable 16th century kings, we understand very little about how their two queens contributed to their reigns. How did these young foreign women become effective and trusted consorts and powerful political figures in their own rights? This book argues that Catherine and Margaret's performance of queenship combined medieval queenly virtues with the new opportunities for influence and power offered by Renaissance court culture. Although medieval court culture was important too. I mean, I think it was Eleanor of Castile who added a new dimension of courtliness to her husband, Edward Longshanks' court. It was very much rough and ready until she came along. I seem to remember the same thing for William the Conqueror's court as well, for his wife. Anyway. Royal rituals such as childbirth and the royal Maundy, courtly spectacles such as tournaments, banquets, and diplomatic summits, or practices such as arranged marriages and gift-giving, were all moments when Catherine and Margaret could assert their honor, status, and identity as queens. Their husbands' support for their activities at court helped bring them the influence and patronage necessary to pursue their own political goals and obtain favor and rewards for their servants and followers. Situating Catherine and Margaret's careers within the history of the royal courts of England and Scotland and amongst their queenly peers, this book reveals these two queens as intimately connected agents of political influence and dynastic power. I don't know when I'll get to read this, probably not this quarter, well, definitely not this quarter, but this looks good. I hadn't really read anything about Margaret Tudor, and I liked the idea of the comparison. I think I got this one off of eBay. Anyway. That's all for this Tudor video. That ended up being a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I think I still have time to get the other videos that I want to get recorded before I head to bed. Thank you very much for hanging out with me, if you stuck with me this long. And I will see you next time that I put up a video. God bless. Bye.